So if you've followed this channel for a while now, you know that I've been a pretty hardcore Call of Duty player for honestly most of my life. Going back over 10 years, I started back in Call of Duty 4 and have been playing ever since. But when I think of those old Call of Duty games, the one thing that always sparks my memory is those weapons that just stood above all of the rest. The guns that are considered by many to be overpowered, but definitely the most used weapons in those Call of Duty games. And that is exactly what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be going back through every Call of Duty game, starting at Call of Duty 4 and going all the way to Black Ops 4. We're going to look at every game and talk about the best weapon in every single game, looking at some of the stats and an explanation as to why this weapon was the best. Now, just as a little bit of a caveat, all of the weapons that we're going to talk about in this video are going to be the weapons that were the best for the majority of the game. So in other words, if the game just came out and one of the weapons was super overpowered, like the Model 1887s in Modern Warfare 2, and then got nerfed and then wasn't really good for the rest of the game, that weapon isn't really going to count. These are the weapons that were used for the majority of the game and considered by most people to be the best in that game. Now, real quickly, before we dive into the old Call of Duty games, I just wanted to let you guys know that later today, I will be streaming over on Twitch around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and what we're going to be playing is Gears of War 5. We're going to be playing through the campaign, and the game just came out today, so if you're at all interested in checking that out, it'll be the first link down in the description, and we should be playing through the whole thing throughout the weekend. So if you haven't checked out my Twitch, like I said, first link down in the description, and that should start around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. So like I said, some of these games do come down to personal preference, and if you disagree with me, feel free to let me know what your list is down in the comments below. I'm really curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think is the best weapons in every single Call of Duty game. So like I said, if you disagree or you agree, feel free to let me know down in the comments. But without further ado, let's dive in and start off with the classic Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. So the first game is really straightforward. The best gun in Call of Duty 4 was obviously the M16. As far as honorable mentions though, you have things like the MP5, AK-74U, which actually have very similar stats. A lot of people don't know that. On top of that, the M40, of course, the sniper rifle, the one that everyone used, but really nothing compared to the M16. Now, the magic of this weapon simply comes down to its damage and fire rate. The damage of this weapon, you're always going to be getting a 2 to 3 bullet kill. Even if your enemy is using Juggernaut, you can still get that one burst kill with 3 bullets. And consistently, you do get that one burst kill, and that's what really makes this thing amazing. Now, on top of that insanely good damage profile, the fire rate of this thing with the burst delay included is 523 RPM, which for nowadays, for an automatic assault rifle, that's even good. And as you're going to see throughout this video, one thing that Call of Duty has always struggled to balance was the burst fire assault rifles. And the reason for that is because if you make them good, they are really good because that burst has a super fast fire rate. But if you nerf it just a little bit by either making it have a really long burst delay or a slow fire rate or low damage, all of a sudden that gun isn't that great anymore. So there's always been this struggle to balance the burst action assault rifles, and it just so happens that in Call of Duty 4, the M16 was the best of the best. And speaking of best of the best, moving into Call of Duty World at War, this is another no-brainer, but the MP40, obviously, in this game. And not only is the MP40 the best gun in this game, the MP40 might also be the best gun ever in any Call of Duty game. Not only is the damage profile of this gun absolutely incredible, on top of that, it has a decent fire rate, and if you use round drum, you have a 64 round magazine. But just as some stats, this gun is actually a 2-bullet kill normally. You don't even need stopping power to make this thing a 2-bullet kill, which is just bananas. So not only can you not use stopping power, you can use Juggernaut instead and be running around like a mini tank with an MP40 that has 64 rounds and it still be getting 2-bullet kills. This gun is absolutely incredible. The only really downside to this weapon is for an SMG, its fire rate was only 535 RPM, but with its damage profile, with the amount of bullets you have in this thing, it just didn't matter. This was by far the best weapon in World at War. Now moving on to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, this is where things get a lot more difficult because there were a lot of guns in Modern Warfare 2 that were just straight up overpowered. There was also a lot of things in Modern Warfare 2, like One Man Army Noob Tube, that were just straight up overpowered. My personal favorite weapon in this game is the TAR-21. I love this gun. It has a great damage profile, great fire rate. I like it silenced, but I also know that the TAR-21 was not the best weapon in the game. And it gets interesting because there's a lot of weapons that could go under the umbrella of best gun. The ICR had no recoil. The FAMAS had an incredibly fast time to kill for a burst action AR. The RPD was incredibly powerful. The SPAS would be like the first shotgun that you can consider to be one of the best weapons in the game. But what I think it comes down to is the UMP. The UMP-45 was just godly in this game. It was by far the best SMG, and I think by far the best weapon as well. It had a great fire rate, great damage profile, and for an SMG, it had great range. But really, the magic with this weapon came in with its recoil. It had an incredibly low recoil that was easily manageable, that you could pick people off with that good damage profile, and on top of that, the range of this weapon was equally as good with a suppressor on. So not only did you have a great run and gun weapon, you had a great run and gun weapon that you didn't show up on the UAV. And this was basically my go-to weapon anytime I was playing Modern Warfare 2, and definitely one of my favorite weapons of all time. Now after this, we move on to Black Ops 1, and in my opinion, this is another super obvious one, but the number one weapon in this game is, of course, the FAMAS. Now, I believe that this is the first time we saw the FAMAS as a fully automatic weapon, and it was just really good. Now, it wasn't the best weapon for the entire life cycle of the game. A lot of people forget about this. When the game was first launched, the AK-74U was actually the best weapon. However, it got nerfed pretty heavily, and then from then on in, the FAMAS just kind of took over. Another honorable mention is the Galil, but it just couldn't keep up with that ridiculously fast fire rate that the FAMAS has. And on top of that, with that ridiculously fast fire rate, there was also basically no recoil on this weapon. So you could literally pick people off across an entire map with a fast fire rate, amazing time to kill, and no recoil. And that is why the FAMAS was the best gun in Black Ops 1. Moving into Modern Warfare 3, I really don't think this one is as hard as, let's say, Modern Warfare 2. However, I think there are two weapons that really stand above the rest: the ACR and the MP7. The ACR was a super accurate, pretty high damage, pretty high fire rate assault rifle, whereas the MP7 was a high fire rate, middle of the road damage, middle of the road recoil SMG. And I think this one is pretty simple. What it comes down to is which one was more consistently good, and that one simply goes out to the ACR. The ACR was good in any situation. Even if you were up close, it still had a fire rate of 705 RPM. And on top of having no recoil and good damage, that was just a recipe for success with this weapon. And I think most people can agree that the ACR is the best weapon in Modern Warfare 3. That being said, the MP7 is really close behind. Moving on to Black Ops 2, this was another game that was really difficult for me to decide which was the best weapon. When I first thought back, the first gun that came to my mind was the FAL, a super high damage semi-automatic assault rifle that absolutely shredded and dominated the competitive scene for the first half of the game's life cycle. However, I then remembered that it actually got a pretty big nerf and then everyone kind of stopped using it. The AN-94 was my personal favorite weapon, the weapon that I used the most and got the most kills with, but when it came down to it, the weapon that I think is the best in the game is the M8A1. This was a semi-automatic assault rifle that really didn't do that much damage, but had an incredibly fast fire rate for a burst action weapon at 789 RPM, which was the second fastest out of all of the assault rifles in the game. Now, on top of all of that, it also had essentially zero recoil, which made it incredibly easy to use. And as we go through these different games, I just realized how big of a deal low recoil is. Going back to the previous Modern Warfare games, Modern Warfare 3, you had the ACR no recoil. Modern Warfare 2, you had the UMP essentially no recoil. All of these guns that have low recoil are just really good. The M8A1 being absolutely no exception. This gun shredded during Black Ops 2. Call of Duty Ghosts is an interesting one because the way Call of Duty Ghost worked is just every single weapon in the game had an incredibly fast time to kill. So this one made it a little bit more difficult for me, but what it came down to is the weapons that I remember doing the best with. And there was two SMGs that this really came down to, but the one I went with was the Vector CRB. This is the weapon that I remember being the best and doing the best with, an incredibly fast fire rate. Some other weapons that I also remember were the MSBS before it got nerfed. This thing was a beast. It would have been the best weapon in the game, but it got absolutely destroyed with a nerf, and now it's even hard to get a 2-burst kill with this weapon. But also the Honey Badger, the Remington, really good assault rifles, but it just didn't beat out the Vector for me. That really fast fire rate, the maneuverability of this weapon, and really it had quite low recoil for an SMG with such a fast fire rate. This was my personal favorite weapon, and on top of that, the weapon that I think was the best in Call of Duty Ghost. However, this could be one that I think a lot of you may disagree with me about. Moving back into the really straightforward games, we've got Advanced Warfare, and this game had two guns that stood above all the rest, the BAL-27 and the ASM-1, and it was a tough call between the two, but the one that I decided with was the BAL-27, specifically, if you want to go this far, the variant of it, that was the BAL-27 Obsidian Steed. Now, this gun had a middle-of-the-road damage profile, but a ridiculously fast fire rate and zero recoil. You could pick someone off across the map with this ridiculous fire rate and just not have to worry about aiming whatsoever. It was absolutely insane. And really the only reason why I chose the BAL over the ASM one is that extra range that the BAL has over it. Both weapons are incredibly good and by far the best two in the game, but in my opinion, the BAL-27 takes the cake on this one. After this is Black Ops 3, and Black Ops 3's best weapon actually changed several times with different weapons nerfs and buffs, and originally the best weapon by a long shot was the Vesper. It had an over 1000 RPM fire rate and pretty low recoil. However, it got nerfed a few times, and now a lot of people just don't use it because there's just simply too much recoil. Other weapons that are really good, one of them is a DLC weapon, the M16. It almost acts like the M16 from COD 4. It's a 2 to 3 bullet kill, so you very frequently get 1-burst kills. Out of all of the DLC weapons in the game, it is by far the best. On top of that, you've got the Broccoli gun, aka the Brecci. This gun is just stupid. Whoever designed this shotgun, it is by far, I think, the best shotgun that's ever been in a Call of Duty game. You don't even need to aim down sights. Basically, hit 2 pellets out of shots, and you're going to kill someone. It is, I don't know who designed that, but I think the most consistent, best weapon in the entire game has to go out to the VMP. This weapon was good beginning to end. For most of the game's life cycle, it was considered the best weapon. Most of the pros constantly use this weapon. It's a really low recoil, high fire rate SMG that is just consistently good from the beginning of the game till today. After this, we have Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and this was one that was kind of hard for me to decide because I didn't really play that much Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. I wasn't the biggest fan. But I think when you ask anyone what their go-to weapon was, most people say the NV4. It's just a good weapon all around, kind of like the ACR from previous Call of Duty games. Just a really low recoil, good damaged weapon that's pretty much good in any situation you get into. Of course, there was good SMGs like the ERAD and things like that, but I think for me, I just gotta stick with the NV4 on this one. After this, we've got Call of Duty World War II, and this one, I think there's kind of two weapons, the first of which is the Volk Sturmgewehr. This weapon was added as a DLC weapon and immediately was the best weapon in the game. Really good damage profile, basically no recoil, and a really easy weapon to use and do well with. Now, eventually it did get nerfed, not to oblivion to the point where it was useless, but nerfed to the point where it wasn't really the best weapon in the game anymore, and for it to be as good as before, you had to use certain attachments like advanced rifling and rapid fire, things like that. But I don't think that was necessarily the best weapon for the entire life cycle of the actual game. I think the best one, most consistent one, has to be the PPSH. This was basically everyone's go-to gun. In a game where you were getting absolutely destroyed, everyone would end up using the PPSH, and I think it just comes down to a weapon with a really good fire rate, good damage, and relatively average recoil. I won't say that it had good recoil and was easy to control, but it was easy enough for a weapon that fired that fast. Kind of like the VMP from Black Black Ops 3, quite honestly. And with this, it just seemed like everyone gravitated to this weapon as their just go-to weapon. On top of that, if you watch competitive play, a lot of people were using the PPSH. So that is kind of why I decided as this for the best weapon in the game. And then finally, we have Black Ops 4, and I'm guessing you guys know exactly what I'm going to say for this one. First of all, you've got the Stingray. This is a weapon that was added in as a reserve, aka DLC weapon, that with its operator mod literally shoots explosive bullets, and it is so overpowered. I still think to this day, even after it got nerfed by a large amount, fire rate and damage, it is still the best weapon in the game. But just to be devil's advocate, let's, for example, give another weapon that has been there from the very beginning. I think from the launch of the game, the best weapon was actually the Auger DMR. This weapon is a semi-automatic weapon that, if you're using high caliber 1 and high caliber 2 and you shoot them in the upper body, has a potential time to kill of 0.18 seconds. In a Call of Duty game that has 150 health, that is incredibly fast, and that's pretty much why I give it the #1 spot in the game. On top of that, once again, very low recoil on this weapon. And ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much that. That is the best weapon in every single Call of Duty game. Like I said before, if you disagree with my list, if you think something differently, let me know what you think down in the comments before. Let me know a weapon I missed. I'm curious what you guys have to say. Also, if you enjoyed the video, I'd love it if you could hit that like button. These videos where I go through every COD game really do take a while to put together. So as always, if you enjoy it, I really appreciate it if you hit that like button. And of course, if you're new to the channel and like what you see here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on, as it is the best way to stay up to date on all my videos. But guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.
Listen.